The sun had just begun its lazy climb over the dusty ridges when Clara Jenkins stepped off the stagecoach into the high summer haze of Prairie Rock, Colorado. Her boots touched the ground with the weight of everything she left behind: Illinois, the sewing table, her daddy's old watch, and her pride. All she carried now was a worn trunk, a letter yellowed at the corners, and a silver locket pressed close to her heart. The letter was from a man named Thomas McCready, a rancher, widower, and father to a few young uns in need of a woman's touch. He'd written careful words, plain and kind, saying he sought not just a bride but a partner, someone who could help tame the homestead and soothe the aching loneliness of a widower's life. Clara, with no kin left and not much tying her down, had read that letter every night for a month until the ink seemed branded into her memory. The wind stirred her skirt, warm and dry, and carried the scent of wild sage and horse sweat. She squinted down the main street. Dust blew like ghost dancers across the dirt, but there was no Thomas, no cart, no welcoming smile. She waited. 10 minutes, then 20. The driver grunted, tipped his hat, and pulled away, leaving Clara and her trunk alone in the rising heat. A boy with freckles and a straw hat wandered up from the livery, chewing a twig. "You lost, ma'am?" he asked. Clara smiled faintly. "I'm looking for Mr. Thomas McCready. He's expecting me." The boy scratched his head. "Ain't seen O.L. McCready in near a month. Some say he rode off after the cattle prices dropped. Others reckon he's 6 feet under by now." Her heart sank, but she kept her chin high. "He left children. 7, according to his letters." The boy shrugged. "That ranch of his is still sitting yonder past the Willow Creek. House looks like it's been through a stampede. Don't know who's living there now." With no other choice, and a stubbornness stitched deep into her bones, Clara hitched a ride in a grocer's wagon out to the ranch. The land turned wilder as they went, sunflowers giving way to weeds, fences sagging like they'd lost the will to stand. The ranch was barely more than a house, a barn, and a yard where time had forgotten to pass. She stepped down from the wagon, boots sinking into dust. The front door hung slightly ajar. A wind chime made of old spoons tinkled weakly in the breeze. And then she heard it, voices. Not just one or two. Several. Small. Sharp. Child-sized. She pushed the door open and was met by 7 pairs of wide, wary eyes. Dirty faces. Bare feet. The eldest, a girl maybe 10 years old, stood in front like a little soldier, a broom clutched like a sword. "You ain't Pa," the girl said. "No," Clara replied gently, "but I reckon I might be your ma." They stared at her, stunned silent. Then the youngest, a boy no older than 2, toddled over and wrapped chubby arms around Clara's leg like it was the only safe thing left in the world. And right then she knew. Whether Thomas McCready had run off or met his maker, those children weren't alone anymore. Clara Jenkins had arrived, and she was staying. The first night was quiet, too quiet for Clara's liking. 7 children, no more than 10 years to the oldest, curled up like pups around the main room, on couches, on quilts, on straw mattresses dragged close together. The baby, sweet Toby, slept in Clara's lap, drooling warm against her skirt. She sat in the rocker that groaned with every sway, watching embers die down in the fireplace and wondering what in thunder she'd gotten herself into. That house was more shell than home. Holes in the roof, boards in the window frames, and a kitchen with barely enough flour to dust a biscuit. But it had walls, and those walls held the kind of silence that came after heartbreak, not peace. Come morning, Clara rose early. Always had. It was in her bones like stitches in cloth. She stoked the fire, boiled water, and began an inventory in her mind. 7 mouths. 1 sack of oats. Half a block of salt pork. No milk cow. No hens in the coop. The pantry held nothing but a sack of onions and an old jar of something that might have once been pickles. She dusted the table and patched the curtain with part of her underskirt. The little ones stirred with the sun, blinking at her like she was a ghost. The eldest girl, Mary, stood with her arms folded and suspicion carved deep into her brow. "You don't gotta stay," she said, like she'd rehearsed it. "We're fine." Clara wiped her hands on her apron. I didn't ride 1,000 miles in a borrowed dress to turn tail at the first cold shoulder. Mary didn't smile, but she didn't speak again, either. Clara learned their names one by one. Mary, the little general. Will and Tom, twin boys wild as tumbleweeds. Ruth, who hadn't spoken since their pa disappeared. Sam, 6 years old and missing 2 front teeth. Ellie, the middle girl, always scribbling, with a charcoal stub on old feed sacks. And Toby, the baby, barely more than a toddling mess of curls and drool. That day, Clara worked like a woman possessed. She fixed the well pump, hammered the porch rail straight, and swept the house top to bottom. She sent Mary and Ruth to gather eggs from the wild hens in the brush and let the twins chase off a rattler near the woodpile. Supper was grits and onion stew, humble but hot, and every child had seconds. By twilight, she stood in the yard alone, looking out over the fields. The earth was thirsty, cracked and tired, but summer still clung to the grass with stubborn gold. Wind danced through the dandelions growing, wild by the fence line. She heard the screen door creak. Turned. Mary stood there, arms crossed, but her voice was softer now. That stew wasn't bad. Well, I thank you, Clara said. You got a fine piece of land here, Mary. Just needs some care. It was Pa's, the girl said flatly. He was supposed to come back. Clara nodded slow. I know what it is to wait on someone who never shows. But sometimes, darling, God sends you who you need, not who you expect. Mary looked at the sky, then down, then back at Clara. We don't got much. Clara stepped forward, placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. You got each other, and now you got me. And in that moment, just for a flicker, Mary let her lean in. Not all the way, but enough to start. Behind them, the house glowed soft with lamplight. Inside it, 7 children drifted to sleep with bellies full, and someone listening to their dreams. It wasn't love yet, but it was a beginning. By the 3rd day, the town began to whisper. Prairie Rock didn't take kindly to questions without answers, and Clara's sudden arrival, coupled with the absence of Thomas Macready, stirred up tongues like a stick in a hornet's nest. At Miss Gilroy's mercantile, folks murmured behind sacks of flour and bolts of gingham. She showed up with a trunk and a letter. One said, "No ring, no proof," muttered another. "She's probably after the land." But Clara didn't pay it no mind. She had 7 young lives to look after and too many chores to waste energy on gossip. The house needed mending, the animals fed, and the fields cleared of thistle and spite. Her hands grew calloused, her back sore, but her spirit held steady. At sunup, she taught the children letters, with a stick and dirt. At sundown, she read them tales from the only book she brought west, a tattered King James Bible with her mama's handwriting in the margins. One morning, while tending to the garden patch, such as it was, Clara found a note tucked under a stone by the fence. It was scrawled on feed paper and pinned with a rusty nail. "That land ain't yours. Best move on before somebody makes sure you do." She read it twice, jaw tightening. She didn't tell the children, didn't burn the note, just folded it careful and tucked it into the inside pocket of her apron. Later that same day, the preacher came calling. Reverend Amos Pritchard was a thin man with a wide hat and a worrying habit of clearing his throat before saying anything of importance. Clara welcomed him with sweet tea and a firm seat on the porch. "I'm told you arrived under curious circumstances," he said, sipping too slow. "I came here expecting a husband," she replied. "Didn't find one, but I found something worth staying for." Pritchard adjusted his collar. "The town's uneasy. They don't know what to make of you." "They don't have to," Clara said plainly. "I didn't come for their approval." The preacher frowned. "These children, they yours by blood?" "No, sir," she said, "but they're mine now." That gave him pause. He nodded, thoughtful. "You got spirit, Miss Jenkins." "No, Reverend," she said, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I got work." By week's end, the house bore her mark. Curtains hung clean, floors swept. Even the barn held its head a little higher. The children moved with less fear, more laughter. Mary helped cook. Sam fed the pigs, and Ruth, sweet Ruth, began to hum when she thought no one listened. And one afternoon, as Clara sat patching, Will's torn overalls on the porch. She looked up to see Sheriff Harlan Boone riding up the path. He dismounted slow, dust rising behind him like an omen. Clara stood, brushing her hands on her apron. "Miss Jenkins," he said, tipping his hat. "We got a problem." She squared her shoulders. "Only one." He didn't smile. "There's a claim been filed on this property. Man says he's kin to Thomas McCready. Says he'll be talking the land." Clara blinked once. "And the children? Don't much care about him." She nodded slow. "Well, that's a shame. 'Cause I do." Boone sighed. "Ain't saying I agree. Just giving you fair warning." As he turned to leave, Clara called out after him, "Sheriff." He looked back. "You tell this man, whoever he is, that if he wants this land, he better come with a deed in one hand and heaven's mercy in the other, 'cause he'll find no welcome here otherwise." The sheriff studied her, then nodded once and rode off. Behind her, the children had gathered by the screen door. Mary whispered, "Are we going to have to leave?" Clara turned, her voice steady as thunderclouds. "Not if I can help it." And she could help it. She would. The first sign of him came with a buzz of flies and the stench of cigar smoke. He rode into Prairie Rock, not like a man returning home, but like one fixin' to take what he figured was owed. Name was Clayton McCready, Thomas's younger brother, though the two hadn't spoken in over a decade, by most reckoning. He was long-limbed and mean-eyed, with a gold tooth that caught the sun and a voice like a snake coiled to strike. Word traveled fast. He'd gone straight to the land office, a packet of papers in hand, and a claim ready to be filed. Said he was next of kin, and by all accounts, that made the ranch his. Clara heard it from Reverend Pritchard, who rode out that very afternoon to warn her. She didn't flinch, just nodded and finished kneading dough for the next day's bread. "He can file all he wants," she said, voice even. "Paper don't raise children." But inside her, storm clouds gathered. That evening, she sat the children down around the hearth. No fire, just the glow of lamplight and the creak of old boards beneath their feet. "A man's comin'," she said plainly. "Says this land is his." Sam piped up, "What's that mean for us?" "It means," Clara said, "we stand like fence posts in a windstorm, tall, strong, and side by side." The next morning, Clayton showed up. Didn't knock. Just strutted up the porch like he'd bought it at auction. Clara met him at the door, a rolling pin in one hand and a glare sharp enough to slice leather. "You must be the mail-order mistake," he said, grin wide. "And you must be the relative no one invited." Clara shot back. He held up a stack of papers. "Got the law on my side. Filed it this morning. That land, that barn, that house, it's all mine now." Clara stepped out onto the porch. "You ain't laid a finger to raise those children. Ain't fed 'em, taught 'em, held 'em when they cried. That house might have belonged to your brother, but it don't belong to you." Clayton's smile twisted. "You planning to fight me, missy?" "No, sir," she said, stepping close, her eyes burning with purpose. "I'm planning to bury you in paperwork and public opinion. You want this land. You take it through every inch of law this county has. And in the meantime, you best not come near these children unless you want to find out what a mother fight's like." Clayton didn't back down, not right then. But he didn't press forward neither. Just spat into the dirt and rode off, tossing threats over his shoulder like seed in bad soil. The children were quiet that night. Clara tucked each one in with a smile and a story, even though her hand shook when she folded the blankets. Later, she sat on the porch with the stars stretching wide above and her Bible open in her lap. "The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusted in him, and I am helped." She read the verse twice. Then she closed the book and whispered to the wind, "I'll keep him safe, Lord. Just give me strength." From the barn came a soft snort, the old mule stirring. A coyote called from the ridge, lonesome and distant, and Clara sat there in the quiet, a woman with no blood ties to the children inside, but their mother just the same. It was the kind of summer that made the fields green and the heart restless. The rains came steady in June, and with them, a second wind for the ranch. The garden Clara planted in blind faith began to sprout, corn, beans, and enough squash to fill every empty jar in the pantry. The children took to chores like bees to wildflowers, their hands blistered but spirits brighter. Mary found her voice again, not just in backtalk, but in the quiet way she sang while shelling peas. Ruth, the shy one, took to sketching the goats, though she always made their ears too big and their eyes too wise. The twins, Will and Tom, stayed muddy and happy from dawn to dusk, and little Toby learned to say Mama. He meant Clara. That one word nearly buckled her knees. Still, the piece wasn't foolproof. Clayton hadn't left. He was biding his time, whispering into ears at the saloon, trying to build a case stronger than truth. Word was, he'd found a lawyer from Denver, the kind with slick shoes and sharp eyes. One Sunday, as the church bell rang soft over the prairie, Clara stood on the chapel steps and looked him straight in the eye. He stood there, smug as a rooster in spring, and tipped his hat. "Enjoy the house while it lasts," he said low. "I intend to," Clara replied, her smile a calm blade. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table, the lamplight flickering, over legal papers she could barely read. She wasn't an educated woman, not by books, but she was quick, and she had grit. She wrote a letter to Judge Harlan Dunn in Lincoln County, a friend of her late father's, explaining the situation in her neatest script. Then she packed a box with every letter Thomas had ever sent her, his promises, his plans, his will tucked between M like a forgotten prayer. She posted it with a 2-cent stamp and hope in her heart. Then she got back to work. July brought fireflies and blistered hands, but also laughter. The kids surprised her with a birthday cake, lopsided and half-burnt, but covered in wild strawberries. They sang off-key, and Toby smeared flour on her cheek. For the first time in years, Clara laughed, till her sides ached. But peace never lingers long on the prairie. Late one night, thunder rolled over the hills, and with it came a knock on the door. Not frantic, not friendly. Clara opened it to find the sheriff. "Clayton's filed a motion," he said, not meeting her eyes. "He's got a hearing scheduled. Wants you out by month's end." Clara stood still, a storm in her chest. "I ain't leaving," she said. "Not unless I'm dragged." Boone gave her a sad smile. "I figured you'd say that. Judge is due in town in 2 weeks. That's when it'll be settled." She nodded. "Then I best start gathering character witnesses." And she did. The next morning, Clara walked straight into town, children in tow, boots caked in field dirt, and went door to door. She didn't beg. She didn't plead. She told the truth. About the children. About the land. About what a mother does when the world tries to take her family. Some doors stayed shut, but many opened. By sundown, she had promises of testimony from half the town, folks who'd seen what love looked like, and what it didn't. As night settled over the ranch, Clara sat under the stars, a child's hand in each of hers. The fight wasn't over, but neither was she. The day of the hearing dawned dry as cotton and twice as rough. Prairie Rock's little courthouse sat like a weary old man at the edge of town, whitewashed boards faded gray, porch steps groaning under the weight of folks come to watch. It wasn't every day a woman fought a man for land, much less a brood of children not her own. Clara walked up them steps in her Sunday best, dress pressed and braid pinned firm. The children followed close, their eyes wide but their backs straight. She taught him that, how to stand proud even when your boots pinched and your heart pounded. Inside, the air was thick with sweat and judgment. Clayton sat near the front, his city lawyer beside him, a man slick as a grease trap and smiling, like he'd already won. Judge Harlan Dunn, gray-bearded and thick through the middle, banged his gavel once and squinted over his spectacles. "Let's keep this civil," he said. "Miss Jenkins, you may begin." Clara stood. Her voice didn't tremble. "I came here on the word of a man named Thomas McCready," she began, holding up one of the letters. "He asked for a partner, a mother for his children. I didn't find a man, but I found a promise." The judge nodded. "Proceed." She handed over the letters, dozens of M, some ink faded, others tear-stained. She spoke of the day she arrived, the house near ruin, the children scared and hungry. She told of the work done, the crops planted, the nights spent nursing fevers and shooing nightmares. One by one, folks stood to speak for her. Old Miss Avery from the Post said Claire had brought order to chaos. Reverend Pritchard claimed he'd seen miracles, but none as mighty as that woman's will. Even grizzled Sam Denton, who hadn't spoken kindly since the war, stood up and growled, "If this town's got any decency left, it's because of her." Then Clayton's lawyer stood. He painted Clara as an opportunist, said she came with a sob story and found herself a meal ticket. He waved the deed in the air and hollered, "Blood is thicker than pity." Clara said nothing. She just looked at the judge, her hand resting gently on Toby's shoulder. Judge Dunn cleared his throat. "I've read the letters. I've heard the voices. The deed may be in Mr. McCready's name, but family isn't just ink and blood. Sometimes it's built with hands and held with heart." He banged his gavel. "This court rules in favor of Miss Clara Jenkins. The land remains hers until these children are grown, and maybe even after." A gasp ran through the room. Clayton jumped to his feet, red-faced. "This ain't over," he spat. Clara met his gaze, calm and steady. "No, sir," she said. "It just finally started." Outside, the sun poured gold across the fields, and for the first time in weeks, Clara felt the air go easy in her lungs. The children hooped and hugged her. Mary clung to her waist. Toby laughed loud enough to scare off the crows. They rode back to the ranch in the old wagon, a little beat up, but full of promise. There was still work to be done, fences to mend, and winter to prepare for. But for now they were home. For real. And for good. Autumn slipped in quiet-like, the way dusk slips across the prairie, soft, slow, and steady. The fields outside Clara's window turned golden rust. Cottonwoods rattled like old bones in the breeze, and the sky wore that endless stretch of blue that only came after the heat had passed. The harvest wasn't bountiful, but it was honest. Enough squash, potatoes, and wild onions to fill the root cellar. Enough corn to keep the chickens pecking, and the bellies full. Clara and the children worked from sunup to supper, side by side. They canned jars, till their fingers cramped and laughed, till their cheeks ached. Sam named every jar. Big Ruth, Baby Tom, and one labeled Hope, set on the highest shelf. But even with the land theirs, peace was not without cracks. One evening, while Clara was stringing beans on the porch, Mary came to her, with eyes big and solemn. "I saw Clayton," she whispered. "He was watching from the ridge." Clara's hands paused mid-thread. "You sure?" Mary nodded, jaw clenched tight. "He didn't ride close. Just sat there on his horse, like he was waiting." Clara stood and scanned the horizon. Nothing moved now but the grass and the light. But the threat clung like the scent of a burning field, old smoke never quite gone. She told the children to stay close to the house, kept her shotgun loaded near the door. At night, she sat on the porch in silence, watching the ridgeline, her shawl wrapped tight and heart even tighter. Then, as if the land itself wanted to offer something back, the fireflies came. Thousands of them. They danced through the dusk, tiny lanterns flickering through the tall grass. Ruth, who still spoke in whispers, laughed out loud when one landed on her nose. Will and Tom chased after them like wild colts, and even Mary forgot her worry for a spell. Clara watched, a soft smile on her lips. "They're like stars," Ellie said. "Stars that decided to come down and walk with us." The first frost came 3 days later. It dusted the windows in delicate lace and turned the garden into glass. Clara rose early, bundled the little ones, and built a fire that could warm bones. She stirred porridge with honey and told stories of her own childhood, of summers back east, of riverboats and root cellars, and how her mama used to sing while mending socks. They listened like it was gospel. That night, with the wind howling just right and the moon hanging, like a lantern in the sky, Clara took the locket from her neck and opened it. Inside was a single curl of her mother's hair and a faded photo of a house long gone. She held it for a long time, then passed it to Mary. "This ain't just mine," she said. "It's yours now, too." Mary took it with care. "Does that make you my real ma?" Clara smiled. "Don't know what's more real than this." They didn't speak again. They didn't need to. Outside, the cold settled in. But inside, the fire burned warm. November blew and hard and bitter. The wind came down from the mountains, mean as a cornered rattler, and brought with it a sky the color of gunmetal. Clouds hung low, pressed in on the land like a warning whispered between clenched teeth. Clara could feel it in her joints. Trouble was close. The morning started like any other. She sent the twins to gather kindling, had Ruth helping Ellie make biscuits, and tried not to worry when Mary lingered too long by the window. It wasn't till midday, when the horses grew skittish and the chickens huddled under the coop, that she knew the storm wasn't just weather. Something darker was coming. And then came the sound, hoofbeats, slow and deliberate. One rider. Clara stepped outside, apron still on, shotgun cradled in her arms. Clayton McCready. He sat astride a black gelding, coat flapping like a scarecrow's shadow. His face was leaner now, drawn from drink or debt or both. But the smile was still that same oily twist of confidence. "Thought I'd come take one last look," he said, tipping his hat. "You've had more than your share of looks," Clara replied. He leaned in the saddle. "You know this ain't done, right? Land or no land, you ain't one of us. These people, they'll forget you once the novelty wears off." Clara didn't blink. "Then I'll remind him. Every day." He chuckled, dry as kindling. "You got fire. Shame to waste it out here." "I'm not wasting a thing," she said, her voice low. "But you might want to get off my land before the children see you. They got more courage than sense, and I won't have them getting ideas about dealing with snakes." Clayton's eyes narrowed, but he pulled back on the reins. "We'll see how long you last." Then he turned and rode off, leaving tracks in the frost that led nowhere good. Inside, Clara found Mary with her fists clenched. "He was going to take it all," Mary whispered. Clara wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "He can take his threats. We'll keep the rest." That night, the storm broke proper, wind howling like wolves on the ridge, snow spitting sideways, and the chimney moaning like a haunted fiddle. Clara moved through the house like a candle flame, steady, small, and vital. She checked windows, stuffed quilts in the cracks, and lit every lamp she had. Then, as the storm bore down, she gathered the children around the fire. "We may be little," she said, "but we are mighty. We've stood against worse, and we'll stand through this, too." They listened, not just with their ears, but with their hearts. And when the wind screamed loud enough to make the shutters rattle, Clara sang, soft and strong, a lullaby her mama used to hum while mending clothes by lantern light. It didn't chase the storm away, but it held it at the door. And sometimes that's enough. The storm had passed. What it left behind was a land hushed and heavy, blanketed in white and silence. The trees bowed under the weight of snow. The fences creaked but held, and the roof, by some mercy, had survived intact. Clara woke to a world muffled and still, as though the prairie itself had paused to breathe. They spent the next days clearing paths, knocking icicles from the eaves, and drying damp quilts by the fire. Clara's hands were chapped and raw, but her spirit stayed warm. Something had shifted, not just the weather, but the children. They clung to her more now, looked to her with certainty instead of fear. Then came the letter, folded neat, with a seal Clara didn't recognize. It was from Judge Dunn himself, handwritten in a shaky script. "Miss Jenkins, the town of Prairie Rock hereby recognizes you as the legal guardian of the McCready children, with all rights and responsibilities therein. Your claim to the land is secure under the homestead provision of 1862, and no further challenge will be entertained without cause." She held the letter to her chest. Her hands trembled. Then she laughed, just once, low and full, and called the children inside. They danced. No music, no instruments, just stomping feet and clapping hands and the whoops of children who didn't fully understand what the letter meant, only that it was good, and it was theirs. That night, Clara took a piece of charcoal and scrawled something above the mantel. "The McCready Jenkins home, EST 1883. It weren't fancy, but it was honest, and it was theirs. The townsfolk came out a few days later, wagons laden with canned peaches, winter coats, and tools. Clara had never asked, but they brought it anyway. Quiet offerings for a woman who never stopped, never flinched. Even old Sheriff Boone brought a bolt of blue calico and muttered, Figured you might want to make something pretty, for once. Then came word of the harvest dance. It was an old tradition, cornbread and fiddles, cider and circle dances out by the schoolhouse. This year, Clara was asked to lead the supper table. She almost said no, but Mary put her hands on her hips and said, "You baked 7 pies last week. You can bake 2 more for the town." So she did. That night, she walked to the schoolhouse with Ruth on one side and Ellie on the other, both wearing dresses Clara had stitched from flour sacks and dreams. The boys chased each other under the yellow lantern light, and Mary stood by the cider barrel, awkward but proud. Clara didn't dance, not at first. She stood off to the side, watching, content. But then came a tap on her shoulder. Reverend Pritchard, blushing like a boy. "Ma'am," he said, "may I have this one?" She smiled, soft and surprised. "I suppose," she said, "you may." The music was clumsy, the floor uneven, and her boots pinched something fierce. But it was the finest dance she'd ever had. The winter deepened. Snow lay thick across the prairie, soft as wool and twice as quiet. Days shortened, nights stretched long, and the wind whistled low through the fence posts, like it was humming its own sad tune. But inside the house, warmth lived. Real warmth, the kind built not just from firewood, but from laughter and shared burdens. The Clara Jenkins home was no longer a half-forgotten place on the edge of town. It was stitched into the rhythm of prairie rock. Clara hung a hand-carved sign above the porch come December. A good place to stay. And folks took it to heart. Travelers stopped for coffee and directions. Widows came by with soup and stories. Even old Clayton, bitter and beaten, never did show his face again. Word was he headed south, and not a soul shed a tear. The children grew. Clara noticed it in small ways. How Mary stopped to skin and started doing. How Ruth's voice had found its way back through the quiet. How the twins fought less and built more. How Toby now ran on his own legs, calling Ma, from sunrise to supper. One morning, Clara found him standing at the window, staring at the snow. "What you looking at?" she asked. "Home," he said, simple and true. The first real snow came in mid-December, soft and steady. Clara and the children spent the day bringing in pine branches, stringing popcorn, and building a crooked snowman that wore one of Will's old hats. Supper was beans and biscuits and a warm apple pie. Crust burned just enough to be familiar. That night, after the little ones were tucked in and the wind had gentled, Clara stepped out onto the porch alone. The moon glowed silver over the hills, and the snow sparkled like someone had spilled a bucket of stars across the land. She breathed deep, not just to feel the cold, but to remind herself she was still here, still standing. And then she heard it, behind her, quiet footsteps. Mary stood there, blanketed and barefoot, looking out with her. "You ever miss where you came from?" Mary asked. Clara nodded slow. "Sometimes, but not the way I thought I would. I think I brought the best of it with me." Mary looked up at her. "You ever think about leaving?" Clara turned, wrapped the blanket round her shoulders too. "Not once. Not since I got here." They stood like that a while. 2 women, one grown, one nearly there, with snow falling like grace all around them. And in that silence, in that stillness, Clara realized something true. She had come west chasing hope. But it wasn't hope that kept her. It was love. Unexpected, unruly, and unforgettable. And from that moment on, no matter what came through that door, be it hardship or joy, or just another long day of raising hellions, Clara Jenkins McCready stood ready. Because she wasn't just a mail-order bride anymore. She was their mother, and that made her the strongest woman in the West.